Scrutiny Committee. We're a few minutes late starting, so apologies for that. We have one substantive item on our agenda today, looking at the environmental strategy, but before we get to that, we'll just go through the other items on the agenda. So I've had apologies from Councillor Everett, and I think that Councillor Manning is unwell still. I don't think I've had any other apologies. Thank you. No public questions or petitions. No declarations of interest. I don't think. No. Item 4, the minutes of the Scrutiny Committee from the 9th and the 16th. I'll ask you if you're happy to take those as an accurate record, and then we'll have there's a point that I need to make on them. So are members happy that those are an accurate record of the meeting? People nod. Okay, thank you. There is a reference in there to one of the recommendations where recommendations ask the Council to work with the CCG on health education regarding air pollution. This is a note I've had from the monitoring officer. Whilst the CCG are part of the health system, their responsibility is primary care provision, and it's really the public health team at Norfolk County Council with Public Health England that would lead on health education initiatives. We would therefore like to suggest the committee amends the recommendation to work with public health partners on health education regarding respiratory problems. So it's being brought under the minutes item because it relates to the minutes. It's not an accuracy issue with the meeting, with the minutes, because clearly our recommendation was to work with the CCG. But are you happy that we can tweak the amendment to better reflect the exacting nature of the public health function? Can I get an indication that members are happy with that? Yeah, thank you. Is that acceptable? Yeah, great. Thank you. So that's the minutes dealt with. Now, item 5, urgent report to Cabinet. It's for me just to give you a quick update on an urgent report that came to Cabinet last week. One of the functions as Chair of Scrutiny is if there needs to be an urgent report to Cabinet, I had to give my consent to that, and this is just a process of reporting back to you that there was an urgent item related to work at Carrow House following the purchase. That came to Cabinet last Wednesday. I was telephoned on Tuesday to ask if I was in agreement for that item to come. I was, it did. I don't think there's really anything else that I need to say on that unless you have any particular questions, but you'll have been able to read the Cabinet report and minutes. Any questions on that? Okay, thank you. So, apologies, I'm slightly hoarse today as well, so my voice isn't quite what I would expect it to be normally. But we'll now move on to item 6, which is the scrutiny report from the environmental strategy. Unfortunately, we don't have Helen Chamberlain with us today, but we do have an assembled cast of thousands of officers who are here to answer questions. So we've got Richard Wilson, the Environmental Strategy Manager, Ramona Herman, the Strategy Manager, Emma Smith, the Strategy Officer, Claire Tullett, the Environmental Strategy Officer, and Rachel Sowerby, the Fuel Poverty and Energy Officer. Plus we also have Councillor Hampton, who's the portfolio holder, and Louise Warswan, who's the CLT member responsible. So thank you all very much for being here. Ramona, I believe you'll just take a few minutes to outline the report, which was in your name, and then I know that there will be many questions from members. So thank you.
Thank you. So just to introduce myself, I'm the new strategy manager. This is my 3rd week replacing Adam Clark. And so it's my first local government job, so apologies in advance for any things I need to learn. So I wrote the cover note to this paper, which essentially provides you with the Cabinet report, which goes into greater detail about the work that has been done recently, the achievements of the Council in this area, and particularly the cover note draws out the work that is ongoing now, where we are taking account of where we are in terms of climate and environmental issues, taking a really whole Council approach to understand any gaps and developing a roadmap for future work. So paragraph 4 of the cover note sets out the timetable for that. Stage 1, identification of actions already taken, and that's what's summarised in the Cabinet report, which comes alongside the cover note. Stage 2, identification of new opportunities, gaps and risks, which is running from now into the kind of early new year, into February. And stage 3, options assessment and development of a forward plan. And I think what we'd like to say is that it feels like very good timing for the Scrutiny Committee to be looking at this, because we do have these months ahead to look at what more we could do, what we might do differently, to weigh up options and see what's possible within the resources. So I think Scrutiny Committee's views and recommendations would be great value to that.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Hampton, did you have anything you wanted to say from a political point of view at the moment, or will you just take questions as they come up?
I think I'm mostly happy to take questions as they come up. Obviously presented a lot of this work at Cabinet last week, so most colleagues will have got a picture of it already, but yeah, I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay. Great, thank you very much. Well, without any further ado, I'll look to members for questions. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ramona, and to Emma for this report. I'm actually really pleased to see the sort of direction that the council's taking now. I think after certainly the time that I've been at the City Council, the direction seems to be moving towards more of a focus on area-wide emissions and a strategy bringing in partners rather than just the council's operational emissions. And so that's being done through the Climate Commission and the work with UK 100 that the council is now undertaking. So I'm really pleased to see that, and just sort of looking to see confirmation that that's going to continue and be built on. Well, I've got a few questions, but I'll start with one. Can I ask 2 questions to start off with, and then I'll come back for another round maybe. A couple of questions first on investment portfolios and environmental objectives within that. This is something obviously that's been raised a number of times by Green councillors over the years, and we've never really had a proper response to it as to why the council isn't considering environmental objectives in its investment portfolios, commercial investment that is. And the second question is about the barriers to getting more renewable energy investments. And obviously there's the solar panels going in at Hurricane Way, but when we're looking at what other councils are doing, there are other councils that seem to be making more progress on that. And I suspect that there's a sort of a gap between the commercial investments team and finance teams and environmental strategy team, perhaps with a bit of under-resourcing for the environment strategy team. And so I want to get views on that. Unfortunately, Annabelle's not here, so I guess she would be best placed to answer both those questions, but I'm hoping that somebody can answer that. And they're probably slightly political questions as well, so I'm looking to Emma.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Osborne. Councillor Hampton, do you want to give us pick up the political aspect of that first, and then I'll look to officers who might be able to pick up the non-political aspects. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll pick it up briefly to say this is on the radar. We have started having discussions with my other Cabinet colleagues who have finance and their briefs and other kind of useful areas. Interested to hear what comes from the officer side as well, but it has come up as a theme. We're on it, and I'm happy to look at suggestions that come forward in that area.
Any officers want to elaborate or pick up on Councillor Osborne's point? Richard.
Maybe just outline some of the work we've done over the 2.5 years, if that would be helpful, since the environmental strategy and a little bit before was published. So the council's looked at battery storage and grid balancing opportunities. This covered sites across the city where council owns land next to large substations. Unfortunately, due to inhibiting factors such as conservation status of the land or its geographical proximity to rivers, etc., this didn't yield any sort of reasonable business opportunities with some decent ROIs, so that's been discounted at the moment. The council's worked to look at installing a private wire system at Riverside swimming pool, and this was with a community energy provider at the time, and this looks likely to be something that would consider in the future with or without the community energy partner. The council's reviewed an opportunity to look at river source heating for St Andrews and Blackfriars Hall. This would need significant funding from alternative funds to our capital programme to make viable. However, the study's been completed. We've also taken a look at doing 2 large solar arrays with and without battery storage at Hertford Tip and our Cossey sites that we have, and both of these have been discounted due to the inflexibility of attaching them to the national grid. It might be possible that we could integrate these into a future funding opportunity that we have applied for around hydrogen and creating green hydrogen sites. We've looked at integrating solar private wire on some of our commercial assets, and this work has been ongoing but has slowed from the COVID pandemic, but it is something that we're going to be picking up again. And the council's looking at ways to connect renewables directly into grid services and railway infrastructure. And we're looking with other local authorities about the use of sleeving, which is where you build an energy asset and then take that energy and take it to supply your own needs. But because the council's already buying 100% renewable energy, it wouldn't lower the council's carbon emissions, but it could be a source of revenue in the future. And historically, we've also looked at purchasing existing solar schemes, but when we went to look at this, the sales prices resulted in poor ROI. So it is something that we're obviously looking at and we have engaged in, and we'll be hopefully revisiting this in the future.
Chair.
Thanks very much for that. I've got a supplementary, I think, and then I'll bring in you, Councillor Driver.
I just want to know how much St Andrews Hall will cost. You said funds were being sought. I don't know how much funds were being sought for it.
So the NPS study to do a river source heat network from St Andrews Hall through the car park and into the river was approximately about £1.5 million. And in all fairness, the carbon it would save, it probably wouldn't be the best thing to spend £1.5 million on. The actual St Andrews Hall assets energy rating is A at the moment because of the fact that people are very stringent with the energy that they use on site. So their existing gas boiler, although not great for carbon emissions, is being used really well. So again, that £1.5 million might not be best spent on St Andrews Hall, but somewhere else in our estate.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, I wonder actually if there's opportunities to get that heat into somewhere else around that area. I don't know. But there's quite a few new developments going on around there as well. But yeah, just that sort of, it's encouraging, Councillor Hampton, to hear about that this is on the radar, sort of finally, but that's really encouraging to hear. I think the example that Richard gave there about the energy sleeving and looking into that, again, this has been talked about for quite a long time. I think other councils seem to be doing that and putting financial resources behind that and commercial investment resource behind that. And that's what we want to see here. So I'd just ask Councillor Hampton sort of for when we can expect to hear more, I guess is the question.
Again, I will get back to you on that. Chase me. It's been quite preliminary, just me trying to find out at the moment what has happened so far, what people think the limitations are. So I don't really have a timescale, but I'm happy to keep in touch about it.
Yeah, happy to talk more about that offline as well.
Thank you for that. Other questions from the committee, please? Councillor Galvin.
Thank you for the report and welcome everyone. Yeah, a couple of things I wanted to ask. A very general one to start with, in terms of officer time, and obviously a lot of work has got to go into this and a lot of progress has been made. There's a huge list of things that have been done, but they're more or less a list, which is good to see, but it looks like it, and I know it's been quantified a bit when it's gone to SEEP and things, but going forward, having a plan with dates and indicators and targets on it, is presumably, I'm looking to see if that's where we're headed with this. Is there going to be basically more of a spreadsheet style plan that will actually have some dates on it? And have we got the resource we need in terms of officer time to do that? Because it's clearly a priority, and I do think, looking into the biodiversity strategy and other things that I want to ask about, if that's all falling essentially to Richard to do, it's a lot to get done. Or is there a team? I don't know about, or do we need more resource around that?
So we've brought in a consultant from ILGA, and we've been looking at ways in which we could quantify the actions within the environmental strategy and the actions moving forwards. Is just trying to find a way in which they will be meaningful, because quantifying action can be quite easy if it's a solar farm, but if it's a communications campaign, or if it's an energy company, it's hard to maybe define what your customer base would be in 3, 5, 9 years. And we wouldn't wish to give definitive figures on what those reductions would be. But I've seen other strategies, and we've discussed it between us, where they've maybe sort of given a high, medium, low, or maybe the project can lower 0.5% of emissions totals in the city, for example. So we're just trying to work through what a new strategy could look like if those actions were quantified. So it is something we're looking at for sure. And those would be, dated as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's right, Councillor Galvin. Just to add to Richard's helpful comments there, from the report you can see that actually that's the process we're actually going through. So yes, we have set out everything that's been done, and you've got that statement, but the second phase between now and February is to look for gaps and risks. And then the third phase is, of course, to develop that forward plan, refresh the strategy, and as part of that we will be considering the resources we need. So that's a piece of work we're going through.
Councillor Galvin.
Thank you. I was going to say, obviously carbon's a good thing to have as the basic measure, and it would be really good to look at the format of that plan so that people can understand it, that's really clear, and perhaps not like a committee report's one thing, but something that can be shared and that's city-wide and area-wide.
Thank you. Another question from me, actually, that relates to the report that came to Cabinet last week. There's a section there on retrofitting, and I guess I've been thinking about that this week in the context of the government's announcement that what represents an absolute drop in the ocean in terms of what can be done to change the way that houses are heated. Obviously, we've had there've been lots of concerns over the last few weeks about the rise in gas prices and the impact that will have on people. Will it drive more people into fuel poverty? So I'm interested what this council can do. We have lots of, there are large areas of the city. We ourselves manage 15,000 or so properties and have been doing good work, I think, on bringing those up to code, but there are lots of, a significant number of terrace properties across the city that perhaps are more difficult to retrofit with other forms of heating. And so I'm interested in what the sort of view is of where the council can be on supporting that, which feels to me like a significant undertaking, and I think we will see more people being driven into fuel poverty because of the rising gas prices at the moment, and retrofitting is not going to be a quick fix. So interested in views on that, please. Rachel, thank you. From a fuel poverty perspective, I guess. Thank you.
So first, you say in terms of retrofitting, we did take a report to SEEP this week, which looked at the retrofitting works we've been doing both on our own properties, and also we've bid for about £4 million in retrofit funding to deliver over this year and next year. As you say, we does need doing in Norwich, but it's a huge amount of money that it would require, so we always look to bid in. In terms of fuel poverty, I think like you, we share the concern that with rising gas prices, it's going to be a difficult winter. We do as a council offer, it's called our warm and well package, and so as a fuel poverty officer, we can offer small term emergency interventions for people in fuel poverty, and then also longer term support. And when it comes to retrofitting, we always are aware of the balance between reducing carbon emissions in the city, but also supporting the people that are in fuel poverty. So it's making sure they're receiving appropriate interventions, appropriate sources of heating. The government has announced some additional funding, for example, for air source heat pumps. It's not always appropriate for people in fuel poverty, so we just make sure that it always is, by getting to know our residents. As I said, there was a retrofitting report that went to SEEP. We've estimated it would cost between £295 and £511 million just to put loft and cavity wall insulation in homes that need it in Norwich. Obviously, there's a huge gulf in funding there. The Committee on Fuel Poverty thinks there's about 17 billion that needs to be spent, and that hasn't been committed by central government. But we are always looking to bid into whatever works we can, whatever funds we can achieve to go out there and help people in fuel poverty.
Great, thank you very much for that. Councillor Osborne and then Councillor Giles.
Yeah, sorry, I'm really, others haven't spoken yet, but I just wanted to come in specifically on that retrofitting point. Obviously, I was in the SEEP meeting earlier this week, so I made some of the points there, but just to sort of reiterate this, the benefit of this committee, obviously great that the council is looking at getting every grant that we can get. I'm disappointed that UK 100 weren't invited to this meeting today, because one of the things I was hoping that they could speak about was about green finance in terms of leveraging in private investment, a lot of which could go into retrofitting, and looking at sources of funding for that work, which will, as you say, be extremely expensive, but also a really great source of jobs that's not reliant on government grants. Again, there's examples of other councils that are looking at doing that, including Brighton and Hove and Lewis District Council, as well as larger councils like Manchester and Bristol City Council. But there's a range of actions that I think the council can be taking that aren't just reliant on government grants. So setting up a retrofit strategy sort of with other partners, with the New Anglia LEP. Again, I'm sort of looking at Lou here because I know we've talked about that many times. Looking at what NRL can do to get into the retrofit market, because that will be a growing source of a growing market, and that could bring in extra income to the council as well. So I think we need to be looking at where can we get extra funding from that's not government grants, and look at how we can use this at a sort of strategic level.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Yeah, we have spoken about this a number of times. We're planning a review of our housing revenue account business plan leading to budgets next year. And in doing that review, what we'll be looking at is the total of our investment capacity and how we best use that capacity to meet our priorities. So, we're building some new homes. We need to maintain and repair and improve our existing homes, and as part of that improvement of our existing homes, we know that some of that is about moving us towards, carbon neutral where possible. So that's going to kick off soon, and once we have a better understanding of the investment capacity, of what the art of possible is, and what costs look like, then we can begin to move forward. I agree with you. We need to look to working with partners around this. Many of our housing association partners have done some significant work in these areas. We need to look to them, to talk to them about how they've done it and how we might utilise that and lever some of that in to support us. There's huge challenges, as you'll know, for a great deal of our stock. It's important that when we build new to the highest sustainable standard we can, so that we're not storing up a new problem. So I think that very much the review of the HRA business plan will inform that new strategy coming forward.
Can I ask the timescale on that?
Yes, the review of the business plan will be undertaken to take us into budget setting for next year. So we will be looking kind of springtime around where that investment capacity is sitting and then how we might use it.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I just come in briefly, if that's all right? I just wanted to say that we do look to engage with BEIS and central government whenever possible. So, as an example, when they do consultation periods on policy and funding, and we do let them know that we consider the stop-start nature of their funding to be a major barrier to retrofitting, which means that many schemes have to focus on individual measures rather than a whole house approach, which is what we prefer to do. And we found it also harms the long-term sustainability of supply chains, as we have local installers saying they're reluctant to bring on staff, knowing that in a year's time that funding is going to be ceased and they're going to have to get rid of them. And we do engage with private sector installers and residents mainly through our Cosy City scheme, so we are continuing to have those conversations as well.
Thank you. I think a political interpretation of the stop-start funding might be that it then means that government can make new announcements, but yeah. Councillor Giles, you were next, then Councillor Carlo, then Councillor Galvin. Thank you.
Thanks. My first question, I was just wondering, some of the announcements the government are making, particularly, for example, in relation to the grants for air source heat pumps. Do we know if that money is going to be given to us to administer, whether that's going to be administered centrally? And the second point I was going to raise in response to Councillor Osborne was in relation to green finance and ESG considerations. Forgive me for my total misunderstanding. My belief is that the best possibilities are in the equities market, and we don't invest in the stock market as a local authority. And in terms of our deposits in banks, we've got to make sure that the banks we deposit our money in have good credit ratings, and I wondered, are there some banks better than others with better ESG credentials, or is that feasible at this moment in time? And forgive me for my ignorance.
If I can pick up the finance element, then I'll hand over, if that's right, Richard. I think it would be sensible for us to refer the finance questions to Annabelle, who isn't here, but we will do that and get a response from the committee.
I'm aware that there's been sort of changes to public works loan boards, for example, where you can maybe do environmental projects that have a benefit, such as a solar farm that has a benefit to the council. So I think there are still revenues that we could maybe explore further. Just some of the risks, though, are that policy changes. So I know that, for example, in battery storage and providing capacity services, lots of people went in early on those new markets, but then those parameters changed and their investments were compromised. So I think we have to take a precautionary approach to these types of new investments. And I think, if we can do it with other councils, that would be obviously good. But I think, being cautious isn't a bad thing when you're talking about 20, 30-year, investment cycles on renewables.
Okay. Thank you for that. Councillor Carlo, or do you have a supplementary?
Yeah, I was just, the announcements that the governments are making lead up to COP26, do we have any idea whether any of these will be administered by us or whether they'll be administered?
As I understand, the indicate at the moment it probably won't be administered by councils, but we're still waiting for the full breakdown. I will say in terms of the air source heat pump funding, it's not enough to fully fund it. It will still need a significant investment from owners. So from a fuel poverty perspective, it's not a particularly helpful grant because they don't have the spare 5-10 grand to top up that.
Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Carlo, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've got questions on three main areas, please. Firstly, measuring emissions. Secondly, adaptation. And then thirdly, City Council having an influencing role beyond its administrative boundaries. So, in relation to measuring carbon emissions per capita, the BEIS data is not comprehensive, and using the Capita data from Oxford University and a wider range of sources such as consumption, flying, food, drink, services, recreation, the per capita data for Norwich is really more than double, so it goes from 3.2 tonnes per capita to just under 7 tonnes. And I wondered if it's an idea, well, my feeling is it would be better to make that clear to citizens in Norwich, because at the moment the BEIS data gives the impression that we're really close to meeting 2 tonnes per capita. In fact, the Oxford University data using a wide range of sources suggests 3 tonnes per capita. That's my feeling at the moment, that we should be a bit more upfront with citizens actually how far we've got to go. Some neighbourhoods in Norwich are really quite high, obviously relating to income. So one of the neighbourhoods, or two of them, are just over 13 tonnes per capita. My second question relates to adaptation. So the council recently agreed a motion to continue to prepare an adaptation strategy, but my point in introducing that motion was to talk about the need for an action plan. So as well as having a mitigation plan, which we're discussing today, having an adaptation plan. And some of the key actions that I suggested that night was, as well as retrofitting, which we've been talking about today, is to reduce the amount of hard surfaces in Norwich, from buildings, roads, pavements, etc., using green vegetation. So I'd quite like to see that as a key action. Also rewilding the River Wensum corridor through Norwich, and also greening the corridor through Norwich. Some of the corridor is really extensively paved, especially the King Street area, Riverside and Carrow Bridge area. So that's my second point. My third point is really about the Norwich City Council having an influencing role, because our administrative boundaries are really tight, and so some of our needs, new homes for example, and additional infrastructure, are delivered outside the city, and we contribute to those decisions through the Greater Norwich Local Plan. But as I raised at the SDP the other day, and the point I referred to, the point in the environment strategy at 7E, we need to build future housing to very high environmental standards, otherwise we're going to have a continuing problem of retrofitting into the future, and we're seeing how much retrofitting is costing. I mean, it's costing billions of pounds around in each local authority area. So my concern is, as I flagged up at SDP the other day, that the GNLP that's been submitted to the Secretary of State is very weak on environmental standards for housing, for example. And related to this is emissions from transport provision outside the Norwich area, for example, but Norwich citizens use. And I was very glad, and particularly in relation to new road schemes, I was very glad to see in the City Council's response to the draft Transport for Strategy Norwich recently, that there is a questioning of a new road building, its contributions to carbon emissions. And I would be really pleased if the City Council was to adopt scepticism about road building as a new road building, especially around the city boundaries, as a council policy. And that's very much in line with the Welsh Government, which recently has adopted a very questioning role to new road schemes. Dropped the M4, but really is abandoning its sort of wholesale new road building policy as a country. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carlo, for those points. Very interesting. Who can I bring in to answer some of those?
Thank you, Chair. I think perhaps there's one or two.
There was some political ones in there, yeah.
Stuff in there that I probably can't help with. In relation to your questions, I think it was around standards in new housing. I think what we'll do with that is we'll talk to our colleagues, Graham Nelson in particular, and ask for a response to that. In terms of adaptation strategy, I don't know if Richard's able to help with that, are you?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, in terms of adaptation, we've been using the sort of UK CIP data sets and exploring how changes in climate can affect council services, and we've been doing that ever since we produced our first L-clip, which was a local climate impacts profile, and I believe it was in 2010. But we recently had a meeting at SLT, I think it was this week, wasn't it? On Monday, about the risk of climatic change. So it's something that the council is, exploring. I hope once we get to a position where we have sort of an agreement of where we want to be going, it's something we'd share with others, internally and externally. In terms of emissions, we do use the national data set. It is a useful tool for the emissions it covers, and is produced yearly, so we can see trends in that data. And I think that's one of the best things about that tool, is that it does sort of show the trends. Whereas other tools that we've been using, especially the tool that you referenced, or tools like Scatter, produce a snapshot, which is very useful to tell us where emissions are high or low, be that areas of the city that have more wealth compared to less wealthy areas, or just as a pie chart to where emissions are coming from in terms of, is it from food consumption or is it aviation? And we use all of those tools to inform our policy decisions. But I think with the national indicator set, the fact that it's produced every year is helpful, and hopefully these new indicator sets that are coming out will start to be also produced in that format. And I think then we can really start to sort of interrogate that data and help us to drive forward policy decisions. And the biodiversity strategy will hopefully cover some of the questions that you had about nature in Norwich and how we can help improve it going forwards.
Thank you for that. Councillor Hampton, did you want to pick up points related to perhaps Welsh Government and road scepticism and things like that? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll do my best, but one of the quirks of this role is that although this strategy sits with me, lots of the implementations are with colleagues, so in this case especially Mike Stoddard, but I'm also happy with how our transport response deals with road building. I think there is going to be more conversation with that, and hopefully that will be indicative of our approach going forward. But yeah, we will be having those conversations. Was there any other political points in there that I need to pick up?
I think probably the sort of general influencing role. The council's influencing role that it can have beyond its own boundaries, which on things which are meeting Norwich's needs or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, of course we'll attempt to show that leadership wherever we can, and but a lot of this is going to be done presumably through responses like that Transport One, and which involve other colleagues more heavily than myself, although they have been very good at tapping me into those conversations now, but there is this explicit kind of climate change role and onus to involve me in that. So yeah, I completely agree with the principle.
Presumably the transport aspect is further complicated by the fact that the county council has taken that function back, and so we can have a view on what transport looks like, but it may well be out of our hands if the county council decides to do it in a slightly different way. Councillor Galvin, I think you're next on my list, please.
Thank you. Yeah, just to pick up on that point, because it's so important. I get that we're using government figures that show trends and things, but if the government figures are literally, half what's really happening, and they're actually leaving out a key way that we're emitting carbon, by road travel and by importing goods, we've got a real problem, haven't we? So I think it's important to grasp the nettle on those figures, precisely because it's about giving people the right information. Otherwise, they'll read something and think, oh, it's all under control. Whereas actually, yeah, one set of figures are under control, but really the situation looks completely different. I think we're not at odds on that here, but probably the strategy going forward needs to reflect that there's more to it than the government figures, as I'm sure you'd accept with any figures from this government. So that's a point really, rather than a question, but I suppose the question would be, do you accept that actually the figures don't reflect quite accurately really what's going on, and there's a need to encompass that? And then the other thing I wanted to ask was about the River Wensum strategy, what's been done, that's there at point 9. So is that, and the biodiversity strategy, I'd be quite interested to see how they wrap in with the work going forward with some dates and things, if that's possible, to know when they'll be looked at. So when will the biodiversity strategy be, and when will there be actions on the River Wensum strategy?
Thank you for that question.
So I suppose I think I've covered this in Cabinet, but ideally it'd be great if National Statistics and BEIS took the lessons which have been applied through Scatter and other tools about appropriate data sets that are statistically valid, and maybe incorporate that into the national statistics and carry that backwards so that there's a valid national data set on emissions that we can all use, because I think it would be very useful for sort of, establishing policy. I think last time I read, and I haven't read it recently, it's probably a year or two ago, that National Statistics was still sort of concerned about some of the data sets that tools like Scatter and University are using in terms of their statistical robustness. So hopefully they can come to a conclusion soon, and those data sets will hopefully be, improved so they can be used more as you describe. In terms of the biodiversity strategy, the EILPA consultant is working with us on that as well, and I believe we've already set out a date to when that work will be finished, which I believe is the end of this financial year, unless I'm corrected. And in terms of the outputs from the River Wensum strategy, I asked the officers today about that, and they're going to be taking a report to the River Wensum Strategy Board in November, and they've given me an outline of the work that's happened and work that's been completed, and I think after that meeting has occurred, they'll be able to share that information more widely. But it looks to me like a number of the actions have been completed where possible, but some have also been reviewed because of different priority changes in the working group that they've established. So I think that information will be coming up pretty certainly soon to you.
Thank you for that. So next we have Councillor Osborne.
I think nothing's going to say out anyway, so I've put them already. So. Okay,
well, in which case I have Councillor Driver then, because Keith indicated a while ago.
Yeah, thank you. Can I ask all our experts over there, what use Norwich are actually doing to the environment and everything in the city and the wider area. I mean, if you go national, I mean, you get certain countries are doing very good. I think this country's doing a lot better than some of them, and you just be China against you, not half the world against you. What other things are councils in Norfolk doing to help our strategy, what we are doing in Norwich? I mean, are they actually hanging on to us, or are they just making it worse, and we've got to agree even further in Norwich to make it even better and bring it down even further just to help South Norfolk, North Norfolk, Portland and stuff who are doing nothing? I mean, how far we got? I mean, it's just like having a little country and then we've got China's all the way around us or something like that. I mean, how much support are you getting? I mean, there ain't many councils, I don't think there's any councils in Norfolk who've got council houses again, and we're doing all this, they've all got private houses, and it seems to me they're not all having solar panels put on or water pumps or anything like that to help. They seem to get rid of away with whatever they want. So I just wondered what we have to do to counteract the rest of Norfolk. Or have we got that totally wrong?
That's a wide question. I'll answer it as best as I can. In terms of the historical emissions and the China question, the UK's obviously been producing carbon emissions for very long time, since the Industrial Revolution, and scientists much better than myself have looked back at the total amount of carbon that's gone into the atmosphere and where it's come from, and the UK still scores pretty highly. It's sort of fourth in that league. And yes, the emissions going forwards, by these developing and developed nations will obviously add more CO2 in the atmosphere. I think that's why they all agreed, to limit as best as they possibly can the emissions to 1.5 degrees through the Paris Agreement. And I understand this will be discussed at COP with greater detail, but at the moment it appears that the policies seem to be unable to achieve that level of aspiration, so it'd be interesting to see what happens at COP. In terms of Norfolk, each council sets their own approach, and there's been a group that's been established, which is the Climate Change Task Force for Norfolk, and that's chaired by one of the Norfolk CEOs as a rolling chair, and that group has been working together to share best practice and to come up with ideas in which we can all work together to lower carbon emissions as a county. And as a county, we are very vulnerable to sea level rise and changes of weather, so I think that new relationship will have lots of positive stories to tell in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Driver. Does that answer your point?
That's fine.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fulton McAllister will bring you next, then Councillor Osborne, then Councillor Galvin.
Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to touch upon something that Councillor Osborne spoke about earlier, about it being a positive that we are now starting to assess the wider impact that Norwich City Council can have. That's a real positive. However, it would be possibly even better if we looked at the current rate of carbon emissions in the entire of Norwich, looked at what we felt that we could have some potential influence over, whether that's soft influence or hard influence in terms of city council, so that we know what proportion we can actually make a difference on, so that we're not holding ourselves to hostages of fortune over national changes in legislation, but also so that we can't missell to the public any achievements that have just happened through natural things happening, like the increase in people using electric vehicles, so that we can actually assess the impact that we've had as a council I don't know if that's better for one of the officers to comment on or for Councillor Hampton to comment on, given it may need some political direction. But by doing that, we'll be able to assess the impact that we genuinely do have. There'll be some political argument about which areas we do and don't have influence on, but I think it would be a step in the right direction.
Thank you. Who can I bring in on that?
I think ideally we'd all have a tool that would tell us exactly what a policy decision and what impact it's had. I think, you know, universities and different sort of bodies across the UK that are, you know, specialists in data and the use of metadata and you know, other sort of statistical tools, they're starting to maybe sort of build an understanding of how you know, those things can be measured, you know, especially using sort of smarter technologies and, you know, AI and all these other different forms of, you know, tools that aren't really available to councils. So I think hopefully more systems tools will be developed that will enable us to monitor these, you know, policy choices in the future.
Could we reach out to them and offer to be a case study? Or offer to be an early adopter of them if they want to experiment with us?
I can't see why not. You know, it's interesting. You know, science at the end of the day. We do work with, you know, other universities, UEA, etc. on other issues. If there's that science working in the city, or if there's scientists that would like to use Norwich as an example, you know, of the technology that can be implemented, I'm sure that wouldn't be a problem for us. I think we were looking at air quality actually recently about new tools that could be used to measure air quality, and that was a university-led project.
Emma, did you want to come in?
Yes, just to say, obviously, with the forthcoming launch of the Norwich Climate Commission, the aim is that that will be very much evidence-based led, and we will have strong links with research tools coming out. Ashley Minns, who heads up the Tyndall Centre, will be co-chair along with Louise here. And so I think that's something that we can feed through to that and certainly put ourselves sort of front and centre for any of those opportunities that do present themselves.
Thank you. Councillor Hampton, did you want to add anything? Thank you.
Not too much to add. As Matthew says, this is going to need a political direction, but I think that has to be guided by the evidence, and where that exists, great. But some of the things you mentioned are things that the council is doing some work on and will support those areas, but equally there will be other bodies, and exactly how you narrow into what our specific influence was and therefore where we should be putting our energy and resources. If those tools exist or are developed, great. I completely agree with that as an approach. And yeah, the Climate Commission is hopefully going to be a good tool with that. We've got both sides. We've got council representation. We've got that kind of more science research driven position as well, co-chairing. So yeah, agree in principle.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Osborne, then Councillor Galvin. Councillor Osborne.
Thanks. Yeah, I've got a couple of other questions, but if I can just sort of mop up a few of the points that we go around. First of all, down to Councillor Fulton-McAllister's point, I'd encourage you to look at the Green Budget Amendment from 2020, February 2020, which was to request an officer to do exactly that work, which that budget amendment was rejected by the administration. On Councillor Giles's point about green finance, I think green finance is sometimes not a very helpful term because it can sort of refer to two things. There's the funding for where the finance is coming from, and then what it's going to, and then there's what the council is doing with its treasury management strategy, for example. And again, I'd encourage Councillor Giles to look at some of the responses to green questions at Cabinet and at Council and at Scrutiny as well, where those questions have been asked and there's been detail provided in response by officers on that. On adaptation, there's a bit of talk about adaptation earlier, and obviously we'll welcome the sort of moves to look at adapting service provision. I want to ask if there's scope to look more widely at adaptation it's not just going to impact directly on service provision, it's going to impact on food supplies, climate change it's going to impact on food supply chain, it's going to impact on the economy, it's going to impact on housing and on health. So I'm wondering how that's being looked at, and whether that can be included in the adaptation strategy. And sort of related to that, and again I guess it's the question to refer to Annabelle, is why climate change is not a specific item in the risk register. I'll ask one other question, which is about the airport expansion. So obviously we talked a bit about the council's role as a sort of strategic player in the area. Norwich Airport wants to triple its capacity. That's just not compatible in any way with any net zero targets, either 2050, the national target, or the 2045 target that the City Council now has. When I asked about this at full council last month, Councillor Stonard said that he wasn't sure what the future holds in terms of airport expansion, and there needs to be balance. And I can only assume that by that he means sort of balancing economic interests against environmental, which to me seems like completely the wrong approach. Again, I guess this is looking to Emma and for a political answer there about how we're approaching that issue of airport expansion, and likewise, apply the same thing to other environmentally damaging sort of infrastructure and economic big players. We've got chemicals manufacturing in Norwich, we can also be looking at other high emitting sectors.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. On the issue of airport expansion, I'll just suggest, or will say not particularly much, but KLM seem to have reduced their schedule from Norwich to Schiphol from 3 flights a day to 3 flights a week. So maybe airport contraction is on the cards simply for economic reasons at the moment. But can I bring an officer in to answer Councillor Osborne's question?
Thank you, Chair. I'll pick up the question about risk, and then Richard will give the other question, and then we'll hand, if that's okay, to Councillor Hampton on the airport side of things. So, in relation to specific corporate risk, we don't have an overarching risk related to climate change, but we deal with it specifically through, individual risks on the risk register, so air pollution, flooding, housing. We deal with it through those individual risks. So the way that our risk register is configured is it's about specific incidents or events rather than that overarching risk.
Yep, and we use our emergency planning and policies as an existing sort of helpful forum and partnership to share best practice on ways in which we can sort of mitigate the harmful effects of events like weather or heat, for example. And we're also discussing and sharing knowledge with our climate change partnership. And I'm pretty certain this will be a topic that I think will be taken up by the new partnership, as well as, this is something that we need to tackle, as we're already locked into a warmer, wetter future. Oh, and yeah, food was highlighted in Monday's discussion as something that we need to investigate further, I think, and Rachel's been tasked to take that forwards.
Thank you. Councillor Hampton.
Yeah, answer's going to be brief, I'm afraid, with airport expansion. As you say, it is something Mike answered previously and is leading on, but that's a discussion for us to have as a political group. There's obviously lots of considerations to be made, and I would be comfortable with just as kind of one member of that group to weigh down either way at the moment, with whatever my personal views.
Councillor Osborne.
Thank you for that very political answer. Just a couple of points on that. Obviously, the mention of food there. In last month, the council adopted the Glasgow Food and Climate Declaration, and Karen Davis is leading on work on food strategy. So hopefully that can also be integrated into this, and that'd be a good thing to integrate into that. James, you made the point about airport expansion. KLM cutting their flight numbers. Again, this is a sort of wider point, but we need to be looking at what do we want the economy to be looking like in a net zero economy, and this applies also to the council's car parks, for example. That's a big source of revenue for the council, but it can't continue to be if we're going to be cutting traffic levels and getting car numbers down. So how do we in this sense, how do we balance those sources of revenue with environmental demands? And we need to be looking at integrating that into the economic strategy. I saw that the economic strategy was out for consultation, a revision of this. I'm sort of looking to officers for details of that, but I noticed that it referenced impacts of Brexit and COVID, but it didn't reference emerging net zero plans, and so I hope that that would also form part of the revision of the economic strategy.
Thank you. So, comment on the economic strategy.
Is it just a moment check? Thank you.
Sorry, can I just come in on the food point while they discuss? Yeah. Just to say, I've noted that, Jamie, and I'll have a look at that declaration and make sure it's fed into that work.
Councillor Osborne, what are you referring to, the environmental?
Economic strategy.
Oh, the economic strategy.
Economic strategy, yes. There was a news piece about it. It was up on the website. I'll look it up and send it to you.
Just give us just a moment then. Chair, I think we'll take that away if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. I was just having a quick look on the website myself because I remember seeing it there, but now I can't. But I think
there's a web page that says Norwich Economic Strategy. Norwich City Council is reviewing the 2019 to 2024 Norwich Economic Strategy to ensure that it reflects current and future economic conditions in the city, and then references COVID and Brexit. I'll send this to you, James, or to Emma, and maybe she can circulate that.
Just looking at the Cabinet report that was taken last week around progress against the COVID-19 blueprint for recovery, I've just found an update that was provided by the Economic Strategy team in relation to the strategy. So would you like just to read through those bullet points?
Yes, thank you.
So obviously this was written a few weeks ago, but the update provided was that the team are currently working with key business networks and intermediaries to put out a series of questions to businesses about their feelings on the economic landscape as we emerge from lockdown and the government's various support measures such as furlough. Then the annual local economic assessment will be completed by mid-October. Then quantitative survey of businesses or engagement through business network organisations will be completed by the end of this month. Then following analysis of the responses, we'll be testing the validity of the data in the economic assessment against analysis of survey responses, and that will be done by the end of November. Then all of that will be used to inform the review of the economic strategy, of which a draft document is due to be considered internally by mid-December, and then it will be going to Cabinet for comment and approval in January, with the final document being published in February. So, yeah, I think the other comments we can certainly feed back to the economic strategy team.
Thank you. I mean, it is, Councillor Osborne sent me the link, and it is fair to say that when being taken to the survey to complete in relation to where businesses what sort of gauge their current position as far as how they consider the review. It does talk about the pandemic, and it talks about our exit from the single market and the customs union, but doesn't ask businesses where they are at in terms of climate change and environmental issues. So I think there is a potentially a missed opportunity there. So it'd be useful if we can feed that back and perhaps look into that. Thank you. I think next on the list was Councillor Galvin and then Councillor Carlo after that.
Thank you. Just a couple of things to come back to working who does what sort of thing. Phrase, what are the councils doing? I know that Norfolk District Council has 2 climate change officers now in recent years, and they are doing, there's a lot actually, a really good programme of events and things. We have obviously events here, the event at the forum and things every year. I wanted to really say that while it's important to look at what we do as a council, we are actually all working together as a county and beyond. When King's Lynn's underwater, people will come to Norwich. You know, people move. That's what we're looking at here. We probably won't be able to just focus entirely on what we've done. We're all actually sharing the same area, especially locally. We're all under threat from sea level rise, and that's happening now. For example, in King's Lynn, cemeteries are having to be closed because they're flooding, you know, so it's actually now, and it's something that will affect us all, and we need to work together on it. So while it's really important to do what we can and know what we can do, we also have to accept that, you know, we're a city, places are countryside, that are different, you know, they'll be able to do different things to us, and I think it's really important that across the county, and I hope the new Climate Change Commission, the Climate Commission does this, actually reach out to other similar organisations, other commissions in the county. And that was my question, is, and apologies if I've missed this, but how will the Climate Commission technically and physically link in with us as a council? How will its reports, is that being decided yet? How do we technically, I'd just like to hear a little bit more about the Commission, because I know it's about to jump, you know, to blast off, so that'd be interesting. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, so a lot of the detail is still to be determined, but I think the current thinking is that the Commission will be independent from the Council. As a general rule, it will report back to the City Vision Partnership, because that's sort of been or provided the mandate for the Commission to be established, and that the Commission will be reporting annually on their progress, and then that will be fed back to the Council and other relevant stakeholders to then respond to formally. We'll be providing the Secretariat for the Commission to begin with. Obviously, Louise is co-chair, and we will perhaps be looking to involve Councillor Hampton in some way, shape or form, possibly as vice chair. So I think that's certainly been put into the draft terms of reference. But as I say, until the commissioners have been appointed, and we're currently going through the recruitment process for that at the moment, I think a lot of the details are still to be determined.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to ask, make one point and ask something. So when you Google it, you get the Climate Change Commission that comes up from 2010 as well, which, you know, didn't, you know, it did exist, but it didn't achieve anything at the time. And how are we going to make sure that this commission does actually achieve, and having an annual report on the progress when time is so tight now to make any change on this topic? It seems to me quite, perhaps maybe we need to put a bit more speed behind it, and also just to hear about, have you had a good response, and have you got a lot of people, will it be a selective process to be commissioners? Just a bit more about that, I'd be interested to hear.
Okay, certainly on the first point, sorry, my mind's gone blank.
How in your report?
Oh yes, sorry. So yeah, I think engagement and it is going to be a real key focus for the Commission. So there'll be an annual report. I think there will be an ongoing iterative conversation with relevant stakeholders. So I think that's very much the expectation. So we would expect that there'll be opportunity to work with the Commission and feed into them, in addition to obviously the more formal annual report. And then in terms of response to the advert, I think we've had around 45 applications from a real good cross-section of sectors. So everything from, organisations, some of our, the county council have also put forward an application, so I think that's really positive in terms of working with them, certainly in regard to some of the transport issues that have been highlighted today. And yeah, sort of down to sort of community groups as well, so that's really positive. In terms of the selection process, so we've got a set criteria which draws on people's levels of expertise and aspirations in regard to how they can help promote the work and support the aims of the Commission. And there's a scoring system in place, and so we've got an advisory panel that are going through that process at the moment.
Just be assured that it'll be weighted so that there's diversity on that group of all types of people, age, etc.
Yes, so that is certainly the intention. So we wanted it to be a transparent process, for it to be representative, and we've built into the process that if we don't necessarily get that full representation in the first round of recruitment, that we will look to go out and recruit further and support people in their applications if need be.
Thank you. Councillor Carr, I think you were next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to come back about the risk register, please, and I may be completely wrong here, so please do correct me. I'm not sure if it's updated every year or if it's updated periodically, but I commented on the risk register, I think it was in 2019, and what I noticed was that housing had been given the highest risk rating, and as a result it had been given a lot of resources, and that was in a sense a political decision, whereas climate events, as Richard had described, that had been given a much lower rating. As a result, it didn't really attract many resources. But as we've seen, climate events now are increasing in severity, and also we're looking at mitigation and adaptation and not just looking at single events. I mean, just a general point, it's now being said that we shouldn't talk about climate as an issue, but the climate as a condition, because it's really an all-encompassing position where every aspect of our society, economy and the environment is affected. And so in relation to the risk register, I'd hope that it may be that it's been updated and been uprooted since, but I just wanted to clarify that, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Carr. Yeah, the risk register is updated quarterly and is reported into Cabinet with the assurance reporting. We see it as a live document, so it's updated really regularly. And as I said, we kind of pick up those issues through the specific risks in the risk register.
Can I just add something to that in terms of the current piece of work that's underway around sort of the environmental assessment? So I think the intention is, once that's been completed, that we do then add in an additional sort of climate change and environmental impact risk to the register. So it certainly is due to come on board. So.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Osborne next, then Councillor Stutley, and then after that I'm going to look to see whether we can perhaps start thinking about some recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We've got two final questions, if that's right. First of all, the Council is looking at getting consultants from ILGO to look at the environmental strategy, if I understand that right. My question is about what the sort of member input into that is going to be and what the sort of consultation process on that will be. And the other question is about the Council's work with UK 100. Obviously there's the Cabinet paper which came to Cabinet earlier this month saying that we will be joining UK 100. As I said again, I hope that UK 100 would be invited to this meeting, which they haven't been, which I think is an omission, and I hope that they will come to a future meeting. But I'd just like to maybe get a sense of, perhaps from Emma, on what we're hoping to get out of that membership and what we'll be doing with UK 100. I know they've got a number of campaigns, for example, on green finance. I think they might have one on retrofitting, but they've got one on clean air and that, and whether we're going to be sort of joining into those campaigns and what that will look like.
In terms of UK 100, we've been a member for quite a few more years than maybe you're aware of, and we've been actively giving examples of best practice. I remember recently they asked for sort of evidence of best practice. We provided our Solar Together scheme and our Passive House Goldsmith Street as two good examples which other local authorities could follow. So I'd hope to think we'll continue to engage in that positive way in the future. You know, now that we're able to sign up to the later, more challenging pledges around emissions reductions in operational emissions and area-wide emissions.
Thank you for that. Was there a political point in there?
Yeah, I guess there's a political question and also the question on member input on the consultant or the consultants.
I wasn't 100% sure when you said Emma whether you were referring to Emma Smith or Councillor Hampton. So thank you.
I can take this moment to also answer a previous question that Lucy Galvin mentioned, was around the events programme. Obviously we work with the County Council already with the Eco Awards, and we've been working with various other local authorities in the One Planet Norwich event that we used to run at the Forum, as well as supporting their events like Green Build. So I think, you know, when COVID allows us to physically engage one-to-one with people again, I think we'd look forward as a council to restart those programmes, as they were very positive. However, over the pandemic, our comms team have been producing various environmental communications via the One Planet Norwich Facebook page, and again that's been quite active over this time period where we couldn't meet people face to face.
I come in on that one as well briefly, just to say from a fuel poverty perspective, hopefully when events are allowed up again, we'll continue with our Warm and Well conference that we used to do in the winter period to bring together lots of organisations, and we always had other councils and other housing associations in Norwich there sharing practice, sharing knowledge, so we fed into that as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay. You had all your answers? No?
The yoga question, which Louise is looking at.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Osborne, I'll come back to you on that. As Helen's not here this evening, I'm not quite sure what the plan is, but we'll come back to you on that.
Thank you. Councillor Hampton.
Forgotten exactly what the points were, but on UK 100, as Richard alluded to, we were members when they updated their membership criteria, which is why we sought to bring forward that citywide emissions target to 2045 through the City Vision Group. We were publicly announced by them as a new member today, and I think their total membership organisations is now in the 80s, so that's gone out on their channels and is really positive. I met with some of the leaders in that in our party conference, and we had a kind of verbal discussion about some of the schemes coming up that we might want to join politically to sort of develop what we're doing, especially for me as someone quite new to this role, although very supportive. And as I say, that's literally just gone through, so I've started to get some emails through with content about what that's about, what there is for us to get involved with. But yeah, it's a bit new at the moment, but we'll certainly be looking to maximise our membership of that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Do you have any follow-up?
Yeah, I just hope to hear sort of what that's going to look like here, maybe in the future, maybe next cabinet, so I can have an update on that one.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report and welcome. Also, just following up on some discussion earlier about the influence of Norwich City Council on the local environment and the Transport for Norwich Strategy document that went out to consultation in the summer. it arguably will have a huge impact on the environment in the city. That document itself was quite heavily influenced by input from Norwich City Council. Suggestions for consultation, clean air zone, workplace parking levy, road charging congestion, and vehicle bans of certain types of vehicle, including the worst kind of polluting buses, all came from City Council. But because this is led by County Council now, the influence that we will ultimately have will depend on their political approach to this and whether these actually make the cut in the final document. And just in reference to the Commission, which does sound excellent, presumably as a committee we can ask for a standing item of reports to come back.
Yeah, I don't see why not. That seems to me an excellent idea to keep us in the loop of the work that Commission is undertaking. So yeah, excellent. Thank you for that. Thank you. There's no other questions. Let's get to whether we've had any recommendations that have come out. We'll start with Councillor Stupler's recommendation that we get a regular report from the Commission. Is there anything else that we think we'd like to see to come out from this scrutiny today? I'll take Councillor Osborne and Councillor Galvin.
A couple of things. First of all, I would like to have you hit 100 come to this committee. I just sort of keep on saying that, but and perhaps we can have a sort of update then from Councillor Hampton on what work we're hoping to do with them, and then have a presentation from them on refinance and what other councils are doing on that. And perhaps Annabelle could attend that. So that's probably a recommendation for the work programme, or it could be a member briefing or something like that. The economic strategy, which was obviously just discussed earlier on, I think there could be a recommendation here to include that, to sort of broaden that out to look at businesses' plans for net zero. Likewise, I mean, there are various things that officers said that they've noted down, like including food strategy in this document. Louise's point about the HRA business case being revised, but I'm not sure if they're necessarily critical recommendations if they're already noted down. I don't know. Sort of look at you.
I mean, in effect, the recommendation from this committee needs to be something that will go to Cabinet. That can have there's a rationale. The report that comes to Cabinet shows a sort of rationale for why we're making the recommendation, plus the resourcing implications for carrying out that recommendation. So just think about any recommendations through that prism. In essence, it needs to be something that Cabinet can act on. And you know, if we make our recommendations ones that can be resourced and there's a strong rationale behind them, I think we're probably more likely to see Cabinet being able to implement those.
Maybe there's a recommendation also then in revising the commercial investment strategy, or looking again at that and how that can support environmental objectives. Again, looking to what Emma said earlier about, you know, this is on the radar, but you know, if there's a recommendation from Scrutiny, then sort of add to that radar, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Galvin and Councillor Carlo.
I'd like to propose a recommendation around, could it come back to scrutiny, so stage 2 and stage 3, the opportunities, gaps and risks, that's in February, I guess. You said this already will come back, but then stage 3, the forward plan, it would be good if we could perhaps, it'll go to Cabinet, I suppose, so if we could pre-scrutinise the sort of how they look when they're in their draft form, would that be possible? Since we've tracked it through so far, it might be good
if I can just look to perhaps Louise to just give some input on the sort of practicalities of timing for that.
Yes, I think we could, you know, if you wanted to include that as a recommendation to Cabinet, for there to be consideration for pre-scrutiny at that stage? It's probably likely to be March, I think, given budget pressures and other things in February, so perhaps in March.
What would that be of? Would that be of, so pre-scrutiny, is that the review, the completed review in March, or it wouldn't be, or would it be the forward plan, how it's looking?
I think, as set out in the paper, there is a little bit of uncertainty about that at the moment, because I think we wanted to leave flexibility depending on, we want to be really open and wide-ranging about developing these options, and depending on how many ideas we develop and then need to analyse, it might slightly affect the timing. And then, as Louise was saying, there will be other pressures on Cabinet time as well. But I think we can certainly take, I think, in principle, we very much welcome the input of the committee, and it will be a question of how do we work out the timings to make sure that fits.
I mean, it's an interesting point for a recommendation, I suppose, insofar as would we recommend to Cabinet to add something onto our own work programme, or is that in effect a recommendation to ourselves? We are deciding that we will adjust our work programme to look at something which is in March, basically. It doesn't. I'm just trying to work out what the Cabinet angle is on that.
So we don't need to ask Cabinet.
No, if we as a committee, and we'll do that on item 7 on our agenda today when we're looking at the work programme, we think that's an appropriate thing to consider at March, then is an appropriate thing to consider at March. So, yeah. Councillor Carlo, please, and then Councillor Fulton McAllister.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to recommend, please, that when the Bay's per capita carbon emissions are reported in any council reports or in the Joint Core Strategy annual monitoring report, that it's noted that the Bay's data set is not comprehensive, and that it currently excludes emissions from sources such as consumption, food, drink, services, aviation and shipping, because it'll indicate to people actually that there are other sources of carbon which are currently not counted in the Bay's data. Thanks.
Are you sure the existing environmental strategy outlines that it doesn't include aviation, shipping and consumed emissions, but the reports that you've mentioned maybe don't do that?
So you're suggesting, Councillor Carlo, is that in effect that's just reiterated each time that there's a report that makes use of the data?
That's right, and also because the council attends the Greater Norwich Development Partnership, that actually it's also reported in the Joint Core Strategy annual monitoring report, please. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Fulton McAllister.
Thank you. So I wanted to put a recommendation that Cabinet actively look at partnering with some type of university or other institution to try to get the tools needed to ensure that we can work out what we can and can't influence. I think that would be helpful if it was a formal recommendation to Cabinet rather than just officers taking that back. The second thing is more just wanting to tighten up one of James' recommendations, if you don't mind. And that was with regard to the environmental impact of any investments, both negative and positive. Actually, I think that we should be slightly amending that to say that it will form part of the investment matrix that we use, so that it's obviously a key consideration alongside various other things, but that might give it a bit more punch. Jamie, do you have any opinions on that?
I think it might be worth actually getting Annibal's opinion on that, because my understanding is PWLB funding now can't be used for anything, just for yield. So in effect, we can't really have a commercial investments strategy per se. It's not doing things that are not for the council's activity, that aren't delivering the council's corporate plan. So I'm not entirely sure where that would then fit in that. But that said, the reason I'm sort of making it slightly wider and reviewing the commercial investment strategy, we do still have a significant amount of property around the country, which is a large amount of finance, and we need to be looking at what we're doing with that property, as well as where we're investing in future as well.
Thank you. What I'm going to propose, because we've had a number of recommendations, and this room is not ideal for making it clear to members what those recommendations actually are, and also not good for me to confer with the person who's been noting down the recommendations. Things were easier when we were on Zoom, I think. But what I propose perhaps is we'll take a brief comfort break while I can go and confer. And then we'll come back and hopefully be able to agree on some wording for recommendations before then quickly looking at our work programme. So if people can be back here by 6:20, please. That gives me 10 minutes just to get everything sorted out, and then we'll hopefully relatively quickly canter on with the rest of the meeting. Thank you. noted down, and what I'm going to propose is that perhaps myself, Vice Chair in the form of Councillor Fulton McAllister and Councillor Osborne, perhaps look at the exact wording of these before they make the final cut. We'll do that after, but I'll just read through what I think we have. So, ask for a standing item of the Scrutiny Committee to include updates on the Council's Climate Commission. I invite UK 100 to come to this committee, update on what work we are going to do with them with regard to the environment impact of any investments, negative and positive, to form part of the investment matrix that is used, and possibly that to be a member briefing. Economic strategy to broaden out to include business plans for net zero. Revising commercial investment strategy to see how it can support the environmental strategy. To recommend that when Bayes per capita figures are reported in Council's reports, it is stated that the Bayes data set is not comprehensive. Cabinet to actively look at partnering with a university or similar to get the tools needed to ensure that we can work out what we can and can't influence. Does that feel broadly representative? There'll be some tweaking on some words, I think, but that's a sense of where the committee was at. Yeah, excellent. Great, thank you very much then. So we'll pick that up over the next couple of days and get the exact wording on that. So that's brilliant. Thanks very much to the officers on that. We will just now, hopefully, relatively quickly go through item 7, which is the Scrutiny Committee work programme. And one of the items on that work programme may well be Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go. I think, apologies, I should have said at the start, I've got to catch a train, so let's go.
Okay.
Just want to register my disappointment that the flight tipping task to finish group has been delayed again, and hope that it gets going soon.
Thank you. Well, we'll hopefully get an update from Councillor Stigley on that in a minute. I've never noted before, I just happened to have opened the work programme report at this page. I've never noted a report that is in the name of Councillor Kendrick. Because we never have Councillor Kendrick along to the meeting to be here while we're discussing the work programme report. But, anyway, yes. So, we have, there are some items on here I need to draw your attention to. Is there an update from NHOSC verbally? No. Councillor Stigley.
Well, I was recruited as the member of NHOSC in the last meeting, but hasn't been a meeting since then, so I've still got reading to do, catching up to do. Okay. I believe the next meeting is January.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much for that then. And Councillor Giles, you've got say something briefly on Community Safety Partnership?
Yeah, I haven't seen my emails today, so I did drop a few of you an email last night just to say I haven't provided a written report on the September meeting because it was a very quick meeting. The final community safety plan for the next 3 years. The final plan was exactly the same as the draft plan before it went out to consultation. And the scheduling of the meeting meant that it was too late to make any changes by the time we met, so it was essentially not very helpful. But I did provide a pretty detailed written report on the draft strategy, so if anyone needs me to resend that across, then I'm happy to do so and answer questions on it.
No, that's great. Thanks very much for that update. Item 8, also paragraph 8 on the report, page 18, talks about an additional meeting of scrutiny that would happen or was due to happen on the 4th of November to look at the business plans for Norwich City Services Limited and Norwich Regeneration Limited. That meeting will now convene on December the 2nd. So thank you. Paragraph 9 talks about the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny Conference. I'll be attending that on the 1st of December, and I don't know whether the Vice Chair is able to attend or not, but that's it. It's certainly a good conference, and I look forward to feeding back to the committee on that. Paragraph 10, Councillor Stigley, could I ask you to give a quick verbal update on where we are at with the work on communal bins and fly tipping, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is the first update, so since we convened this group. So I'll just sort of update where we've got to. We started with 2 initial meetings, including a walkabout in areas of Mancroft and Nelson that are badly affected by issues with fly tipping and communal bins. And then after a summer break, it was intended that we would receive a report to include baseline data and analysis for all the environmental reporting services. Officers have asked for more time to produce this piece of data, and I've accepted that request. It's regrettable that there is a delay, but we are where we are, and there's a delay before we can meet to discuss and analyse that data as a group. The delay hasn't prevented us from developing some ideas, and working with officers and Councillor Oliver, we've identified a number of measures that can be implemented soon, while the Task and Finish group will make a full set of recommendations in due course. So my proposal, which I'll confirm with officers in due course, is to receive the data next week. I think that has been confirmed, so we can analyse that and meet the week beginning 1st of November. And then I'll provide another report 18th of November, which I think is our next scrutiny meeting. And we'll have a full report there with some recommendations and a consultation with the public to follow with a public meeting that they can feed into. And then after we've done that, we'll ask for a report to be provided to the Scrutiny Committee with a full set of recommendations. And I'm hoping that we can do that in December. So rather than, because we're about 3 months behind now with this, so rather than extending it another 3 months, we need to close it with some pretty quick work. And I think that's possible, and I'm looking across to officers for a sort of tentative agreement on that timescale. Hopefully that will be achievable. I'm happy to take any questions, but that is basically my report.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Stephen. Councillor Galvin.
Thank you. I think I was one of the people that asked for this group. I did ask for it because people were really having a bad time, and it's not necessary. It could be sorted out. You know, it's not a difficult thing. I know it's a job to manage bins, but honestly, it's really unpleasant for a lot of residents. And I did talk to them. One came to the meeting where we said we were going to do the Task and Finish group, and took the time and effort to come in here. And I just feel embarrassed that it's taken this long, really, for the council. So I'm disappointed in that. I'm sure it could have worked at a bit more pace, but I'm glad that you've outlined how it will catch up, hopefully. Just wanted to check, did you say that the residents will be involved after the recommendations have been made before?
No, what I'm going to propose is that with the data comes some analysis of that data and some suggestions from the officers for recommendations and improvements to the service that we can discuss at that meeting, and then take forward into a draft document for consultation with the public, and then we'll invite the public to come and feedback their own lived experiences, which is what we want to hear. We want to hear their suggestions as well, which will hopefully then formulate a final document to come to scrutiny to sign off. I think we were going to have a series of meetings that we could use to go into further depth on this issue, but given the delay and the original timetable, it is my proposal to bring it forward. But that doesn't mean that we can't still have a significant piece of scrutiny on the level of service that we've got. As you say, some people are suffering with poor quality in areas, and there are some fairly quick solutions and fairly obvious solutions that we can implement soon, if not now. So I'm hoping that that's ongoing behind the scenes, and also we'll have some more significant work to make recommendations on.
Thank you, Councillor Garland.
Thank you, Chair. And just to say, this actual task finish group, there have been ones that didn't work before this, so it's sort of 2 years late, really, or even longer. That's before I was a councillor. So it really is important to push hard to get this done. So I understand, time limits and things, but it is people's day-to-day lives that are being affected. And the other thing is, I think lived experience is really important to bring in the process of this, not to go at the end with ideas and check them, but to actually, in my understanding of scrutiny, how I think it works best is if we can involve people just as a general point in the process rather than go to officers and at the end, and also that officers talk to members of the whole scrutiny panel, not have separate meetings and come up with ideas. Just outline that actually has as part of the task and finish group.
I'll bring in Councillor Still in a minute. I think it is important to make very clear that, for example, on the walkabout we did, that wasn't in isolation. That wasn't some councillors just wandering around and seeing things for ourselves. We had members of the public coming out of their houses to talk to us about their lived experience, including the member of the public that came to the scrutiny meeting. So that was a good opportunity to hear from them, to have them show us their area and the concerns and the problems they have in their area. So I think that this isn't something that is being done in isolation. But Councillor Stewart.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was going to mention that that meeting, we spent 2 hours with members of the public on that day, and we did hear a lot and we learned a lot that day. But the work that I've been carrying out or looking into separately is part of cabinet support to Councillor Oliver. So it's an ongoing process anyway that we would maintain rather than actual side subgroups of the task and finish group. It's just ongoing work with a view to improving the service generally.
Okay. Thank you for that. Well, let's carry on through the report. Item 11, so paragraph 11, is the scope for the substantive topic, the 18th of November meeting, the emerging new social agenda following COVID-19. The note at the bottom there is members are asked to confirm if they're happy for an officer report to be prepared on the basis of the points immediately above that. If you're happy, then we can get officers to work on that. Are members happy taking that approach? Yeah, got hands up in agreement. Thank you. Yeah. Councillor Giles.
I was just wondering, I'm happy with this. I did suggest perhaps including the review of the new non-commercial debt strategy, policy rather, and I wondered if that was something that could be included, or whether there were reasons why that wasn't chosen.
Do we know why for this item for the 18th of November we weren't able to include the non-commercial debt?
I think that the food poverty was put in there as an example rather than as a kind of be the only aspect. So I think we were generally proposing that we took a bit of a view across of various different inclusion issues. So I think if your direction is that should include debt, then presumably that's how the process works.
Yeah, happy for debt to be included in that. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, Councillor Carver.
Yes, I don't know if it would be possible, please, to review whether the new counter-council arrangements for families and children's centres are meeting needs, especially in the light of COVID. The Scrutiny Committee did consider in advance the council's county-council's proposals probably about 3 years ago now, and they've been implemented. But I feel that they will have increased isolation, whereas we ought to be trying to reduce families' isolation. Looking at the website for the Vauxhall Centre, for example, it seems that provision is offered in terms of online Zoom meetings with individuals, as opposed to bringing people together so that they feel supported. But yeah, thank you.
Sorry, can I just clarify, where are you considering that might be looked at by us?
Well, I suppose, given that the scrutiny has considered the original proposal, which the County Council went ahead with and closed various children's centres and concentrated them on a few, and services there now seem to be offered via Zoom links, and that COVID has made social isolation worse. That it would seem, I feel that the centre's arrangements should be reviewed, and this might be a chance to do that this year.
So just, and I think if I've understood correctly, you're suggesting that sort of fits in with the social agenda following COVID-19, so we can include that in. I think it's definitely worthwhile seeing what we can do about getting an update, maybe approach officers in the county on what's happening with the children's centres.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, this is already quite a large topic in its scope for the next meeting. I think we could perhaps reach out to see if we can get comment. I think our kind of capacity to be able to include an additional piece of work in this might be limited.
Well, I mean, my thought process, picking up on what Councillor Carlo has said, is perhaps if it could simply be a request to Children's Services to provide the sort of information that Councillor Carlo was asking in the context of some scrutiny we've already done. Perhaps from our point of view, not much more than an email asking for that information, which could then be presented to this committee for us to consider. So not a particular huge amount of work, I wouldn't have thought, for officers here, but it might join the dots with some work we'd already done. Great. Thank you. I have one last item on the work programme, and that relates to a request I've had from Councillor Galvin and from Councillor Waters to consider the issue around the housing safety concerns that the Council is now looking at, and for a piece of scrutiny to be undertaken on that. Something that I'd also like to see as well. So we would look to do that at some point in mid-November. Is that the best way to package that up at the moment? With a report coming to Cabinet potentially on the same day as scrutiny then looks at it. Louise, do you want to add any extra information at this stage?
Thank you, Chair. So yes, we're looking to take a comprehensive report to Cabinet in November. And we will be seeking to arrange a separate meeting for that, which will cover, it will be a comprehensive report around the issues that have emerged around health, safety and compliance. And as the Chair has explained, what would be helpful, I think, to me and my team and to Cabinet would be that scrutiny were to look at that report just prior to it going into Cabinet. So to scrutinise that report and then make any recommendations that scrutiny felt appropriate just prior to that going into Cabinet. Potentially on the same day, but we're yet to arrange those kind of timings.
So I think the steer I'm looking for the committee on now is, if you're happy with that approach, then to leave it for me to work with officers around the exact date. Obviously there'd be appropriate notice given for that, but the exact date for when that would be. Are people happy with that approach? Councillor Galvin.
Yeah, it'd be great to do that. When do you think you'll know a date, first of all, and secondly, it wouldn't preclude it coming to scrutiny. Obviously it has to go to Cabinet now as a matter of urgency to agree by budgets and things going forward, but there might be some more scrutiny that will need to be done about the wider picture.
I think
so we could do that later.
Yeah, I think, Louise, your thoughts were that the scrutiny committee would work on an ongoing basis to help firm up and work on with your team on that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So yes, if we could get the pre-scrutiny into Cabinet with the report for some decisions, and then in that report we'll be committing to regularly reporting to Cabinet. I think that we could then we could bring something to scrutiny in a similar way over a period of time to help with that. We just need a bit of time to kind of think through that timetable. In fact, we'd probably include it in that report for consideration.
But in terms of the other question, I think at some point next week we'll get an understanding of exactly when the dates are. So, I would hope we'll be able to tell the committee by the end of next week. Does that sound reasonable? And then the only other point was related to the discussion we've just had, the items that we might want to bring back for consideration in March related to the environmental strategy, and whether we can timetable that in or not. We've got March is looking relatively clear as far as this committee is concerned at the moment. We have the annual review and some updates, but looking at is it stage 2 we'd be looking at then?
Yes, most probably, but I think we'll have a better idea as things move forward. It may be stage 2 and stage 3, but it will depend on kind of progress.
But in principle, from the committee's point of view, if we look to commit our March meeting to that, then are people happy with that approach? Lots of nods. Great. Well, in which case, I have nothing else to say on the work programme. And